My name is Nobungcwele Mpem, and I work as a project lead at the Economic Development Partnerships, and Futurecasting is one of the projects that I work on. And I just wanted to start off this webinar by kind of sharing why Futurecasting at least is important at the ADP and what it is that we are trying to do with this particular platform. So we are wanting to cultivate a dynamic platform for futures thinking and strategic dialogue, empowering communities, governments, and businesses to proactively and collaboratively prepare for an ever-changing future. So it's not just important to think about reacting all the time. Sometimes it is important for us to think and forecast, but doing it collaboratively and thinking, how do we work together to build the future that we want? And we do recognize that there's a lot of uncertainty and complexity that define a lot of our times. And this program actually aims to harness the power of collective reflection to build resilient governments and cities capable of thriving in the face of change by promoting inclusive dialogue, strategic preparedness, and resilience building. Futurecasting aims to contribute to the creation of resilient governments and cities that can only adapt to change, but also lead in shaping a better future for all. And then we believe that in order for you to actually arrive at this point, collaboration and empowerment are essential tools that we need to utilize in order for us to craft or build the future that we want. And perhaps some are asking or wondering, why would a partnering organization be interested in a topic that touches a lot on climate or touches a lot on energy? And we're actually interested in it because we do believe that the only way in which we can solve a lot of the problems that actually directly affect a lot of people and environments is by thinking about it collaboratively. So we are interested in how just energy transition is implemented, to going as far as having a program within the organization that solely focuses on energy and climate. And part of the reasons are that there's to drive economic growth and job creation. We understand that this is a topic or a sector that kind of does work in contributing towards that. So investing in renewable energy, manufacturing and infrastructure are one of the ways in which local industries can be stimulated. There's a creation of jobs and fostering of entrepreneurship, contributing towards economic development, and also addressing high unemployment rates. So we don't think about energy just as how it almost affects us, but we're also thinking about how it actually extends even beyond the source of energy itself and the different ways in which it manifests in our everyday lives, as well as promoting social inclusion. So energy transition is an important part, but then the thing that we want to really emphasize is the just component of it, because it is important to aim for an inclusive transition, spreading benefits across society through things such as job creation, skills development, and supporting of small businesses and marginalized communities, as well as addressing environmental changes so that we move and shift away from non-renewable energy and start to explore what alternative options are there for us. And lastly, we want to enable collaborative implementation. So it is not the responsibility of just the government, of just the private sector, of just the communities to make sure that just energy transition is implemented. It is something that we have to all work together in realizing. And from this conversation, the speakers are actually coming from very diverse backgrounds. However, the work that they are doing is quite dynamic and integrated and contributes and speaks a lot towards the topic today. So we're just wanting to kind of have an insight on what is actually government involved in, what are some of the activities and plans that we are seeing happening within the public sector, and what are some of the future prospects that we are looking into from the public sector, as well as thinking about the private sector and business. How is business thinking and shaping the space, and what are some of the ways in which we want to co-create this future, as well as thinking about more development-driven perspectives, that how can we ensure that community members and other peoples of societies and other sectors can strategically place themselves and thrust themselves into this implementation of the just energy transition. So that is a very long-winded introduction of not only myself, what the ADP does, where the ADP's interest lies in, as well as what to expect, at least from today's webinar. I would like to extend an apology. Unfortunately, Dr. Simon Mason, who was going to be our facilitator for today, is unable to make it. He is in the chats, however, because he likes to work hard, but he's really, really feeling unwell and will not be able to facilitate. But then if you've got any questions, perhaps I know that he'll also be maybe kind of assisting within the chat. So you're welcome to utilize the chats to ask questions and engage. And maybe before we can start off with our speakers, I just would like to set the rules of engagement. So I would like to request that we all switch off our mics and videos for the duration of the presentations from the panelists. And instead, if you've got questions, you are more than welcome to use the chat option, and then those will be picked up, especially in the plenary discussion. I will invite everyone towards the end of the presentations to actually join in. Feel free to write down and jot down your questions so that we can be having an engaged conversation and figure out how can we collaborate even in the spaces that we are in already. So with that being said, I would like to introduce our first speaker, who is Dudu Sibia. Dudu is a climate change coordinator in the Department of Agriculture, Land, and I know that I'm missing out the rest of the acronyms from the department that she works in, and I hope that she can jump in and just give us a little bit more insight. And then we are looking forward to hearing the amazing work that they are doing in Mpumalanga, especially considering how Mpumalanga region is actually affected by this particular transition. So I see she's already sharing the screen. And then the Department is of Agriculture, Rural Development, Land and Environmental Affairs. Thank you so much, Kuku. You can take it over. I can see your screen.
Thank you very much, Nobunwele, and thank you very much, colleagues. We are very happy and pleased for the invitation. I don't know whether you see my camera. My gadget beside still doesn't show.
We see a pretty smile. So,
oh, thank you so much. And as she indicated, I'm coming from the Department of Agriculture, Rural Development, Land and Environmental Affairs. And just to take you a little bit of what we are doing in the province, as you know that, maybe just to go a little bit on the presentation, as you know that Mpumalanga currently is a hotspot for just transition. And if you check, Mpumalanga has got 12 power stations, and one is already being decommissioned, where most of the Komati community are living in. And we have a number of coal mines in the area. And 85% of our coal is actually mined in Mpumalanga. And 86% of electricity is generated there. But we are not only having that kind of a challenge on the hotspot or just transition, but we have again on the greenhouse gas emissions and equality. If you check, basically 50% of South Africa's greenhouse gas emissions is coming from Mpumalanga. Hence, all the focus are in Mpumalanga. And we are still contributing a lot on the air emissions. If you check this SO2 and the NOxes, and we are the highest in the country on the emission profile, and at the same time on the PM10 and NO and the ozone. So when you look at the biodiversity, we are very rich in Mpumalanga with biodiversity. As you know that we have Kruger National Park, But at the same time, when we are looking at the 3 districts, there's a decline, especially in Kangala. You could tell that we are only left with 49% that is still intact of the ecosystem and biodiversity. But at the same time, with the land, there's a lot of pollution on water and land. And at the same time, there's a lot of an unplanned development that is taking place. But at the same time, you can look at it that this is a challenge. It's a challenge that is experienced by all South African districts and municipalities. But because in Mpumalanga, it has got that kind of element of like the mining and energy sector being dependent on and mostly relying on, it looks like it's a biggest challenges. But when you look in terms of the water, land, biodiversity, and the regional economic decline, it happens everywhere. But at the same time, if you check on the youth employment, we are very high in Mpumalanga on our status if you look at the 3 districts. And then this is Mpumalanga, and then currently we have more than 5 million people that are living there in this kind of a district and the unemployment side. We only have 3 districts, Ehlanzeni, Nkangala, and Kgabisibande. In Nkangala, it's where most of the natural ecosystem is very rich, and including the Kgabisibande, where we have most of the grassland as biomes that is kind of key. But this is the slide that we normally use because we're taken from the IRP, that is the 2019, the one that it indicates the scheduled dates of the decommissioning of the power station. You could tell that in Grootegeluk it was supposed to be closed, but I know that with the new RIP, I'm not quite sure how is it going to be handled that way. And then after that, you look at local economic dependency. We are highly dependent economically on coal. And then if you look at the different municipality, you could tell that how much is it going to be impacting them. Not only if there's a unplanned phase out or there's a sort of like continuation of decommissioning of these 2 sectors. So meaning that it has to come up with a lot of planning that is on site to ensure that the employment vulnerability is reduced as much as you can on the local employment dependency. And if you check on the employment side again, there's that sector, the energy and mining sector is kind of key, because more than anything, when you look at the other sectors, the associated sectors that are coming in are reliant on this, mostly the 2 sectors, the mining and the energy sector. But through that whole process, we realized that as Mpumalanga, we have to initiate some policy document that will assist us sort of like navigating the area of the just transition. Because we're not looking only on the side of a just energy transition, but we have felt that we have to look at the higher level so that when we come with the economic diversification, it will be able to spread to all the sectors and the new emerging sectors that we are anticipating that it will be sort of like coming in. But on the just transition phase 1, we're looking more on the social dialogue, that it has to be intensified. So we are working closely with different partners and social partners that are preaching the same gospel in Mpumalanga of the just transition, and then that includes the sector of just energy transition. And the governance side, that is the kind of key. But at the same time, as we're looking in all this, we felt like we have to come with the focal areas. And then the focal area is to the protecting the livelihood and creating decent jobs. So the community were just highlighting to say, if you're closing the power station that is appointing so number of people, you have to come up with a technology that is going to be equivalent to that one. So rather than coming up now with the bitty jobs creation project, that might not be sustainable. So we felt like this, it has to be in a very high level on the skill development and audit, and to ensure that we sustain that. and then covering all the other injustice and inequalities that might come up with that one. And the second one is just the economic diversification, where we felt like it might not be the responsibility of Dalthea, but it has to have that kind of a collaboration partnership when we are looking at all climate technologies that are available, to see what kind of benefits they have and what kinds of impacts they have and what effects that is going to come up with and the risks. And then after that, to determine after that whether is it going to be implementable, at what level, by whom, at what capacity and capability. So if you check again the other part, it was the social protection that everybody was starting to talk to about it, to say that what kind of a safety net do we have? Are we going to be able to ensure that the social infrastructure and the skill and the information management that is there is being highlighted, and then after that kept in that manner? And the other part, as we're continuing, we realize that the service delivery is always linked with that. Because more than anything, the people that we are working currently in those sectors, they still have to pay revenue to municipality for maintenance and all these other services of the infrastructure. So it has to be balanced to say, what are other sort of like a service delivery issues? If, let's take for instance, you decommission the power station, or you close the mine, the community in that area were relying totally completely on the services that was offered by that entity. So now if it's closed down, who's going to be shipping in now to make sure that the clinics are still working, the water, the energy, and all these other issues? So the service delivery issue, it was kind of a key. And at the same time, we realized that yes, the environment mostly is being used as sort of like a blanket or a plate that each and every social and economical activities are happening on. But at the same time, we are here, we are where we are today because we never maintained the three sustainability, social, economic, and environment in a very positive way. So we felt like the environmental side, it has to be prioritized and to be in the same balance as the other sustainabilities. Just like we have to have the environmental regeneration and protection, but now they call it a just socio-ecological transition that we have to carry out, and ensuring that the biodiversity, we don't shift it to the level that it reaches the planet boundary, that it's no longer functioning very well, even for the sustainability of the economy and the social livelihood that we are intending to achieve. And at the same time, this is a transition landscape that the CSRR has developed, but we have coming together and coming up to say, we have to add some kind of an element of the governance side. So we realize that as long as we don't have governance, we can talk about all these other issues, but it might not have a real standing on this transition to ensure that it is managed very well and making sure that the people that are supposed to benefit out of it are not being left behind. So we're looking at the economic effect, because it's where most of the community were highlighting that they have to have the ownership of any technologies that is coming and develop the local entrepreneurship. But at the same time, making sure that whatever the transition is coming up, it has to uphold the green economy and the economic growth of the regions that where they are sitting. So technically, yes, everybody's saying that, yes, we have a stable and reliable grid. But at the same time, they were saying that if we can check basically to say, if each and every household now, they will have sort of maybe solar, and then they have to feed to the grid, the over generation of it, how impactful is it going to have on the systems that is already there? So, and the governance side to cover all the issues, but at the same time to look at public sector performance, to say like, as public sector, are we performing? Are we ready? What is it that really needs to be done basically on that one? And on the social effect, if you just basically check on that one, we're already losing a lot of critical skills because they are transferred, they are looking for jobs somewhere else, that leaving that kind of a void or sort of like a room in Mpumalanga, not having people that are going to be qualified doing that. Are we still like in the institutions that we have, grooming people that are going to feel that on which technologies that we decide on to achieve? But at the same time, on the environmental side, the wind degradation, that historical, how can we restore it? And then after that, bringing the business part out of it, not just to restore and conserve it, but at the same time, making sure that it's going to be user-friendly for the community around that area. So on our transition phase 1 plan, we came up with the Mpumalanga Just Transition and Climate Change Working Group that we proposed that it should be sit at the Premier's office. And at the moment, there are people that are at the Premier's office working on this one, on this issue, that way they'll be convening most of the time this working group, but making sure that it's being coordinated and facilitated by DARIA and economic development in our side. So to make sure that all the technical issues are being addressed very well, that when it's been escalated to the decision makers, it will make sense, especially for them. So if you look at the municipality side, and now we are localizing it at the municipality side, there's a lot of engagement that is happening with the community, but at the same time, there are policies that are being shaped in now to look at the just transition. Even if they don't have sort of like a just transition plan, but with the climate change response strategy, there's an element of just transition, you find it in there. And at the same time, you could look most of the energy and electricity master plan, they're coming up now with a lot of renewable energy and then other sources of energy that needs to be incorporated in the municipality, so that when the human settlement, they decide to build the rooftop houses, they can put solar and then make sure that there's a business that is attached to that. So there's a lot of activities that are going on, intervention and initiatives around the municipality space. And there's a lot of training with our partners like SALGA, COGTA, and other partners that are capacitating the municipality to understand the just energy transition, but at the same time, we elevate it to the just transition element and building capacity on that one. And I think if you saw on the social dialogue, we felt like there should be a lot of mentorship, like and the capabilities to make them being capable of managing this situation of the just energy transition. And at the same time, we are featuring in most of the municipality platforms where we are discussing the just transition issues, the climate change and the just energy transition. We have the LED forums, IDP forums, DDMs. So there's a lot of activities that basically at a municipality has started to engage more in the just energy transition. But if you look currently, we are now looking at all the communities that are around the power stations. The Dipaliseng one, when you started coming to Dipaliseng, we realized that they still have to understand what is climate change. And then after that, what is just transition and what is just energy transition. So you could tell that kind of a level. So somewhere, somehow, most of the people were coming in just telling them about just energy transition, but not looking at to say whatever you're coming up with it as an economic diversification, how can you assist them now to be more greener and then to be more sustainable on the other side? So we got some funding through the Indalo Inclusive to do this project. They call it Climate and Just Energy Transition Intervention Design and Exposure Project, where we allow the community to come up with their own project. We firstly lay the ground of the climate change. They understand, they personalize it, and then as individual to say, if today this is happening, how am I supposed to, how am I expected to respond, and how am I supposed to respond to it? Through that whole process, and then now we are coming up to say, what is it that you can come up as a project on realizing that you can respond to this? So they co-design and co-develop sort of their own interventions at a level of the local municipalities. So we targeted, because the Dipaliseng local municipalities owed only 6 wards. So each and every 6 wards were brought together. And then after that, they say, with the training that we have given you, with the capacity, and then the climate change. So now, how can you create some sustainable sort of like entrepreneurship in your local municipality? So they came up with this kind of sectors: the water, the clean energy, agriculture, and waste and tourism. So on the ecotourism side, they came up with the different kinds of scenarios that they're going to make sure that they are reducing the greenhouse gas emission and adapting to climate. So all this project has got a climate argument in it, and they understand it very well. So in Komati community Ward 4 especially, we assisted by establishing the Komati Steering Committee, because they felt like if they could have sort of like this committee, it will assist them a great deal, because they identified the three pillars actually. The first one, it was socio-economic, and the other one is service delivery, the other one is health and environment. To say if we can look at this pillar in details and ensure that this committee pull in people that are relevant to ensure to say that what kind of interventions we can come up with, because of the decommissioning of the power stations and the other mines around the area that have been already closed, that were the major economical contributor on their side. So the steering committee, it's not long, but at least like it's yielding a very good results on that one. So these are the major concerns that we are encountering as we go along. And then the definition of just transition. What is just? So another guy was saying that they are just taking as it is a just. Like everything is just today, it's just walking, just eating, you know, all these issues. You could tell that community has to understand what, when we are talking about this justice, what is it really entailed? And then after that, the other concern that we are focusing more on power station rather than on the coal value chain, and then more on the jet rather than on just transition, more on the just transition rather than on the climate change, and the limited economic diversification. And the other part is just municipality are really ready for this just transition. And then are the policy ready? So that when we are coming up with these new technologies, is it going to match to the standard of those technologies coming into the municipality when it's planted into their ground? Are they capable of handling those policy and then analyzing it and understanding how can they take it over? So on the gender side and the people with living with disabilities, so these are the issues, and the traditional and labor organizations side. But so far, there's a lot of initiative that has already been done on that side. But at the same time, they were saying that we could see that everybody's working, but you don't have a common goal that you can come up on doing so. On that note, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that presentation. That was actually very, very insightful in thinking actually about how the Mpumalanga is kind of approaching this just energy transition. And I think I am in the same position as that person who's asking what is just and their definition. So I think having some form of a commonality in how certain terms are defined and what it means moving forward for those who are in the business of actioning that would be important points of consideration. So thank you so much, Dudu. And I think that I welcome any person from the audience. If you've got any questions, you're welcome to throw in your questions into the chat box, but I will be asking more questions and we will be having a much more interactive discussion a bit later. So if I can ask you to please stop sharing your screen, and then for the next speaker to start getting ready. So our next speaker is Alex McNamara, who is the head of operations at the National Business Initiative. So as I mentioned earlier, we are not just interested in learning about what one sector is doing. We want to kind of open it up and see where is the alignment, where are we having commonalities, and yeah, I think, is it possible we are seeing your screen and not necessarily the presentation? Yeah, so.
Let's see if putting it in a slideshow works. Does that work or
Yes, it did
not?
work. Thank you.
Great. So, I mean, obviously, I think Dudu has given a very localized perspective, and I think a very important one. We have obviously, as the National Business Initiative, have got a national view, but I think there's quite a lot of commonalities. I mean, I won't touch on our work in around how we think about the ecosystem part of all this. I'm really going to touch on a few fairly specific areas. But I think we have, I mean, I think as the NBI, we're developing a model around the jet that is quite significant and to the point around what is just. I mean, I think there certainly are strong, just elements to what we are doing. And in terms of our approach, I mean, essentially if I try and drill it down to the most essential pieces, how are we approaching this particular problem? The one is we are obviously trying to leverage where there are specific economic opportunities with a very strong focus at the moment on the clean energy value chain. So not so much necessarily clean energy per se, but the value chain associated with that, which I'll build on later, because that's where we think a lot of the economic inclusion opportunities will lie. And by economic inclusion, I mean opportunities for disadvantaged groups, small businesses, Black-owned businesses, to really, the township economy to really be part of this future energy transition. Very important that we build off existing institutions and methods. So as NBI, we are strengthening our partnerships and institutions we currently work with. We don't actually want to create new institutions and methods necessarily. And a very, very strong focus on, as I mentioned, economic inclusion, but also this phrase of demand-led skilling. So I think it was raised before about this need for skills to have this transition, right? And also, if you want to be part of an economy and new market opportunities, you need the skills to enter into that market. So we have a strong track record in basically skilling people, not for the sake of training or skills development, but skilling people for employment. And that's what we mean by demand-led skilling. And there's a lot of opportunity in the green economy space that I'll talk to now. Another really significant part for us is if we're going to localize, so I mean, I guess this is less on the just part in a way, but if we're going to localize, we have to have a significant scaling of the renewable energy market. I've spoken to a number of investors who say, when it gets to a certain point, when your renewable energy installed capacity reaches a certain annual limit or annual threshold, I should say, it's just pure market economics that even your large international renewable energy companies will want to localize at least some portions of that renewable energy market. It just makes financial sense at that point. So our ability to scale renewable energy will lead to localization already, which of course has economic benefits for a wide variety of people. And then we look to how we make that more socially inclusive. The other part of this, I think, is also about innovation and accelerating innovation. And I'll talk through something we're doing on innovation. So that's broadly how we're approaching it. Starting with the sort of how do we skill young people and entrepreneurs for this new economy in particular in the just energy transition. I think we've got a very interesting model that we've developed, and it builds out of work we've done for over a decade in the skills arena. And it relies on technical skills training. So rather, I should say the foundation is technical skills training, in particular, what we refer to as installation, repair, and maintenance, or IRM, which was something that was originally part of the Presidential Jobs Summit, but is now expanded with the Presidential Youth Employment Initiative, and in fact now is part of our Just Energy Transition Investment Plan as a country. And the overriding premise of it is that if we want to bring young people, semi-skilled people, even unskilled people into the economy, where can we find opportunities for them? And one of them is in the technical skills arena. And so we know that if we think about a special economic zone, or we think about some kind of clean energy system, or the broader or the green economy as a whole, there is construction that takes place, there is maintenance that takes place, there is waste services that are required, and there, of course, there are opportunities for industrialization. In all of that, there are opportunities for technical skills across the entire value chain. I haven't included that slide in this presentation, but you can basically map out all the skills that technical people can fulfill, for example, in the clean energy value chain. And they're quite significant. So, and this is in fact work that we are going to be doing in a lot more depth in the coming months, working with the University of Cape Town to map out basically every single skill level and occupation in the clean energy value chain, so that we can find entry points for young people, for unemployed people. Youth unemployment is a very, very strong focus area of the NBI. And we were seeing the just energy transition as a critical means in order to address that. And we do it using technical training as our first entry point. But the technical training is not just technical training, it's also SME development. So a huge part of this is actually an entrepreneurship program as well. And then the question will be, well, how do we roll out this whole thing? Well, we've been doing it obviously for a number of years, but essentially we work primarily with the technical colleges across the country. A number of them, they're all over the place, including in Mpumalanga. And so basically building off what we have already in the technical college system, and then linking that to entrepreneurial programs and various other forms. So this slide is basically our sort of 10-year strategy, most of which is actually underway. We do a lot of training and a lot of placement of young people in different workplaces, and do a lot of SME support already, and have now got, I think, quite significant funding to really make this real. But again, to the point that I made in the first slide, we're doing it building off existing institutions, so existing TVET colleges, for example, and SEZs, which I'll discuss in a bit later. So in terms of trying to make this real, I mean, we're supporting startup businesses, we're supporting township-based enterprises, we're skilling young people for work, we're providing them with workplace opportunities in the green economy, and with a strong focus on the clean energy side. So for us, this is a viable model around the just energy transition. It's not the only model, but it certainly is a viable model. And it's also not just associated with training, skills development, entrepreneurship, but also infrastructure development. So we are in the process of rolling out what we call our IRM hubs, but they're basically training hubs, incubation hubs, where we support young people, we support entrepreneurs, and they are linked to existing facilities. So, for example, they'll be linked to an existing TVET college, or in the case of the Western Cape, they would be linked to the Atlantis Special Economic Zone, which is obviously geared to being a green manufacturing hub in Africa. So we are working with our long-standing partners. We have significant infrastructure investment going into those institutions to provide almost like a one-stop shop for a young entrepreneur or a young person to be trained, skilled, become an entrepreneur, and enter the clean energy value chain. And at the same time, of course, these centers are living labs. So there is a technology sort of practice and piloting process that occurs. And there are targets for local employment, local labor, in the construction, in the operation. So you basically use these entities as a way of bringing the township economy into the more mainstream economy, if I can put it that way. So yeah, we're in the process of rolling these out. The architectural drawings are basically finalized, and we'll be doing full-scale infrastructure development in these sites, starting, if I'm not mistaken, with the Atlantis SEZ at the end of this year. So that's just to give you a sense of the model that we're applying. But that, of course, is just one program. It's one avenue using skills development. The TVET college system is a way to bring young people into this emerging opportunities, right? Because there are significant opportunities linked to renewable energy rollout. And as I say, it's not just about solar rooftops or putting solar on roofs. It's much more than that. It's about the minerals involved. It's about the manufacturing, the operations. It's about the sort of waste and recycling. So we're looking at upstream, downstream, at every single aspect of renewable energy. But part of that, of course, as I mentioned, is growing the market as a whole. And the more we do that, the drive to localize will just become a national. It will become something that just happens automatically, in a sense. So for us, I mean, we've done a lot of work as the NBI looking at the economic and financial opportunity linked to renewable energy, the way in which it would support energy security, economic diversification, the way it could unlock electric vehicles, but also more specifically green hydrogen. And so we've, with our, with over sort of 30 CEO champions and sort of 400 hours of technical workshops with hundreds of experts across the country, have developed a number of pathways reports, which are very well known in the sector, but in many cases that really essentially identify how important renewable energy is to our future economic competitiveness, to achieving a net zero transition, but also really opening up new economic opportunities at quite a significant scale. So if you haven't looked at them, I think this is part of, I guess, the collateral to understanding that actually renewable energy is a low-cost opportunity. We have some of the best renewable energy resources in the world. This can be a significant part of our economic growth strategy in the future, and really has to be if we're going to protect exports and other areas. I mean, what we try to emphasize is that the costs of inaction or the costs of business as usual, our current business as usual trajectory economically, are very high as the world shifts to a renewable energy and electric vehicle future. So that's some of the work we've done. We've also, there are other ways in which we can facilitate innovation in the renewable energy market, one of which is, you might have heard of, is the virtual wheeling framework, which was launched end of last year in a partnership with Eskom and Vodacom. You might have heard of the Vodacom pilot around virtual wheeling. These are the kinds of enablers which over time will allow smaller, medium-sized companies, other entities to really play a role in the renewable energy market. Again, this is about stimulating the supply and demand of the renewable sector to grow the economy and other related industries. And then just lastly, I mean, I don't think it would be, apart from the models that I presented, I think it's very important to understand that we have got the ability to innovate. There are emergent business models and businesses that if we can scale them, they will be local success stories and part of this local transition. And I'm very happy to say that we've been part of something called the Climate Finance Accelerator. It's funded by UK Pact. And we're at the situation now where out of the 10 initial countries globally where the CFA has been active, South Africa has been the most successful program of the CFA over the last 4 years. So I think it's something we can be very proud of. And to date, we've had about 1.8 billion, so almost 2 billion in investment in South African companies, fairly small scale, or in some cases sort of purged for growth, others ready to scale, companies that have now actively got investment linked to market and are doing very well. I don't want to go through the whole list of companies, but some of them, I promise you, if you were walking down the street, you would realize, okay, this is actually a CFA funded business. So, and many of them in the socially inclusive space as well. In fact, there's a very specific emphasis on gender equity and social inclusion within the parameters and criteria. And so we've seen that in some of the makeup of the projects. I mean, not all of them, but certainly a number of them. So for us, I think this kind of combination is the kind of models that will lead to not only economic growth and skills development, but should support localization and social inclusion going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex. That was quite interesting. I think especially thinking about the economic opportunities. And I find that what I'm actually sparks that went in my head is how the interpretation of localization, especially when you're looking at it from a growth perspective, actually isn't just almost hinged on just maybe communities, but then is thinking more cohesively as a country, that how do we look at ourselves broadly and connect into a much more international market, but still that it funnels through into a local through I think that the technical training, because I mean, all those individuals are kind of based in a certain locality. So thank you so much for that, and interesting insights. And again, similar to Dudu's presentation, if you've got any questions for Alex's presentation, please do add them to the chat. And again, Alex, we will invite you again to join us a bit later when we have our plenary discussion.
Sure.
Thank you. And the next speaker to invite is Kalnisha, who I can see is already sharing her screen. I think now you've got the hang of things. Please do share your screen. And then Kalnisha is a founding director from KD Strategies, and she will also be sharing with us some of the interesting work that she is doing within her space. So Kalnisha, I'll just hand it over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for including me on this interesting panel. I must say that our work isn't as sexy as the previous speakers, so I think everyone will just bear with me a little bit. I'm a development economist, and the work that we're doing is around contextualizing the just energy transition in a South African and in African context from the perspective that the prevailing narrative around just energy transition has been imposed on us, and it's not necessarily developed from the ground up for the purposes of our economic growth. We do some really interesting work with utility scale IPPs around developing their local economic development strategies aligned with REAP, and also advising some governments across Africa on integrating or developing their integrated resource planning and energy expansion strategies, with the understanding that obviously there are a few fundamental drivers that enable economic growth and development. Access to energy is one of them, access to the internet is another, and access to education, quality education, is the third fundamental driver of economic participation and growth. And those are the three key challenges that we still face, both in South Africa, but also as a continent. If you consider the fact that somewhere between 600 million and 700 million people on this continent have never had access to electricity, and therefore have never had access to or ubiquitous access to the internet, and therefore quality education is compromised across this continent. And I think it's important for us to have those difficult conversations, because as much as we think about skilling a workforce or even just engaging a workforce, we must acknowledge the speed bumps that are embedded in our economic systems. And it's from that perspective, I think, that I've prepared this presentation, because we've been doing a lot of work in terms of thinking around the Just Energy Transition Implementation Plan, the Just Energy Transition Investment Plans, because we also acknowledge, and we must acknowledge, that as South Africans, we have beautiful plans and strategies. I mean, some of the best in the world, right? We're very, very, very good at designing plans. And we're also very, very good at celebrating our wins, but we're not that good at reflecting on our losses, on our failures, and reflecting on what could be done better. And that is a fundamental downfall for any economic system, because if we build on the cracks, or we build on a compromised foundation, everything's going to crack. This was the question that was posed to me: how can South Africa's just energy transition deliver economic and social benefits in an inclusive way? And it's a beautiful question, but I think it's the wrong question. A very, very clever guy, Simon Sinek, always says we should start with why. So energy transition, like, what is the purpose of our planning and our movement in this direction? And those of us that have been in the renewable energy industry for a while, and we started working in renewable energy in 2006, so it has been quite a while, know that the capitalist reason for the movement in renewable energy is that's where the money is flowing to. International investors, local investors are no longer investing in fossil fuel-based energy generation. So if we want to invest in energy, we want to build energy solutions, it has to be renewable energy, because that's the only thing that's being funded, right? It's not so much a pull, so the renewable energy industry is not being pulled into growth, it's being pushed to growth by how the capital is flowing right now. And it's something that we have to acknowledge, because as much as we dress up our strategies in beautiful social and environmental narrative, the actual bottom line is a function of money. The Just Energy Transition Implementation Plan has this beautiful definition of what is the just energy transition. There's 5 points and several sub-points, and it speaks to decarbonization and social inclusion and all of this wonderful stuff. But is it really it? Is this really why we need to embark on this energy transition that we're embarking on? And again, I put it to everyone that it's not. These are great sort of secondary outcomes potentially, but this is not why we're doing what we're doing. Why we're doing what we're doing is to expand access to affordable energy. Right. This is why Africa is embarking on a renewable energy pathway. This is why Africa as a whole is embarking on an integrated development or integrated energy pathway, because we need energy. We need energy in order to walk an industrialization path. We need energy in order to grow our economies. We need energy in order to ensure that our children have education. It's very, very basic. Our why is very, very basic. We need to enable our economic growth, and we need to unlock these key economic pillars in order to do so. So as much as we can talk the decarbonization narrative from a marketing perspective in order to attract the capital providers, I think we also need to be very, very authentic in our why, because this gives us purpose in terms of forward momentum, to remember why we're doing what we're doing. And once we've answered the why question, I think we can then go ahead and answer the how. So I talk a lot about the capital providers, because we have to acknowledge, like I said, that the reason we're walking this pathway is because that's where the money is flowing. The reality in South Africa, as much as we can villainize the coal industry, the reality for us is that there's 200 years worth of coal left in the ground. So in order to justify not digging it out and exploiting it for our benefit, we need to have a very, very grounded, rooted argument as to why to import products to give us electricity, and as opposed to ensure that people working in the coal value chain remain employed and those households remain fed for us to generate new electricity. It's not a sexy argument, like I said, but it is kind of the truth. Right? So there's in the how question, there are these 4 sort of counterbalancing questions, right? How do we deliver economic benefits? How do we deliver social benefits? How do we ensure sustainability? And how do we ensure inclusivity? And if you model these things out in a sort of econometric model, you'll see that they counterbalance each other, right? So it's difficult to ensure economic benefits and also ensure social benefits. Because if you're imposing like in REAP, in the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producers Program, there are economic development obligations. Every IPP is required to spend 1% or 2% of their revenue generated on community development. All right. So it sounds great, but it compromises the company's profitability, which means it compromises their going concern. Right? By taking money off the top line, you're reducing the bottom line. And so that speaks to delivering social benefits and delivering sustainability, and possibly also inclusivity, as your ability to deliver economic benefits for that organization. And that's also something that as South Africans, because the transformative and development narratives is embedded in all of our industrial policy. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but it's embedded, right? And we have to acknowledge that by driving the social narrative and the developmental narrative, we are fundamentally compromising our ability to deliver an economic narrative, right? And again, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but we have to acknowledge it. And it's an acknowledgement that we haven't made. So it seems like we're selling a narrative that come work in South Africa. You can make some money, you can, deliver good, you can save Africa. But that's not practically the case. Like it's not a balanced equation. But I mean, there is an answer to this question. The biggest how in terms of enabling the just energy transition, enabling increased investment in the renewable energy value chain, is by facilitating equitable access to capital. So the challenge we have is that this renewable energy industry has been built in this country over the last decade, but our financial systems have not adequately shifted or innovated or pivoted in order to meet the requirements of this new different kind of product and industry that's being embedded in our economic system. And I'll give you an example. Utility scale renewable energy is a fundamentally de-risked investment all across the world, right? It's a long-term investment, at least 25 years. And financiers typically distribute concessionary capital to projects like this in the rest of the world. But in Africa and in the other emerging markets, we are considered risky investments, right? So financiers require premium returns for their investments here. So what does that mean? It means that investment in South Africa, when an investor, an international investor invests in Africa or in South Africa, they require a higher than market return. What does that do to the cost of the project? In order to make the project viable, they need to increase the tariff rate, which means that the consumer, us, end up paying higher than nominal tariffs in that equation in order to make sure that the investor in the equation realize the returns that they're expecting from an emerging economy, despite the fact that the renewable energy installation utility scale project is fundamentally de-risked, right? So that's essentially a inefficiency in the financial system, which can be corrected with the right kinds of products, financial products, but nobody's innovating in that direction. So facilitating equitable access to capital is one fundamental, how to enable the just energy transition, how to enable inclusion. What's happened in South Africa, again, in the REAP process, is that local developers are being outcompeted from a financial perspective by international developers. We can't raise the money locally, and therefore we are outcompeted in our own projects. Another material requirement of REAP is that there is community-based shareholding in all of the utility scale projects. And while that sounds like a beautiful thing, what we've done is we've elected collectively to wrap these community ownership mechanisms in community trust, which again, we know from historical experience in this country, it doesn't work to share economic benefits in communities. But these community trusts are wrapped up and then they extended debt financing, which means that a community that has fundamentally nothing enters into these projects having even less than they had before, because now they have 400 million rands worth of debt. And that doesn't speak to sustainability at all, because communities are frustrated, communities are angry, communities are not realizing the benefit or the promised benefit of these projects. And that's fundamentally not sustainable. The other challenge that we refuse to talk about in this country is of electricity is pretty much how most municipalities are financing their salaries and operating costs, right? So embarking on a just energy transition by offering off-grid solutions, encouraging corporates and commercial players to shift to embedded renewable energy generation, we are going to see a situation of where municipalities fundamentally enter into like a rapidly depleting revenue base, which means that the administrative structure of municipalities needs to change, and they need to change very, very quickly, particularly in the municipalities that host, big mining entities. Because we all know that the mines are now embarking on the embedded generation projects, and in the next 2-3 years, those projects will come online. And those municipalities will, as a result, lose significant amounts of revenue, right? What we are looking at and what we are not talking about is this public sector failure that's kind of impending. Now, there's a couple of things there. I don't believe that municipalities should be dependent on the provision of electricity for their revenue structures, but the reality is that that's how it is. And municipalities shouldn't impede the ability of the commercial enterprises to go off-grid either, because then you are hindering economic progress. But the question we need to answer, the challenge we need to solve for, is how do we then restructure municipal revenues so that we attain embedded efficiency without electricity-based revenues. And that's a problem that we're not solving for either. It's an impending problem. So we have a lot to do in terms of answering the how. The just energy transition is a beautifully laid kind of philosophy. I think we need to do a lot more work in terms of unpacking how we achieve it and how we address our particular problems in the context of our country. And how, if we want to position ourselves as leaders on this continent, how we support other African countries or the rest of Africa in addressing the specific challenges associated with the just energy transition in our context. And I think the biggest how for us, and I mentioned this before, is that we need to learn from our mistakes. I mean, we've had 25 years of community trust that haven't worked. Why do we continue designing them? We have financial services institutions that last reviewed their credit policies in the 1970s. You know, it is time for some sort of review in those capital models. We have to also, I mean, as a continent, we have to set our own agenda. The decarbonization agenda is great, but we all know that we only contribute 3.8% of global emissions. So even if we achieve net zero, like what difference does that make? Honestly and practically, and I'm all for the decarbonization narrative, but does it solve our problems? And then the final comment I want to make is like, so once we've solved for why we want to do this or why we're doing it, and we've answered the how questions, so how are we going to achieve it? The last question to kind of ask is what do we measure? So how do we know that we've succeeded? And again, I feel like the pathway that we're on is fair, but it's not necessarily answering the right question, because right now we're measuring greenhouse gas emissions. Right now, we're measuring our carbon offset. We're measuring the reduction of our 3.8 contribution. We're also measuring from a social perspective, community garden, school painted, shoes donated. The combination of those elements doesn't necessarily speak to whether we were achieving success in terms of achieving our goals towards expanding energy access, expanding affordable energy access, and shifting our economic narrative in a direction, in a more positive, more sustainable direction, right? So the suggestion is we need to start measuring the things that are difficult to measure. We need to start forcing ourselves to plan for and execute plans that are difficult to execute. We need to talk about households electrified. We need to talk about our improved manufacturing and education capabilities. We need to talk about improved education levels, economic development, municipal efficiency, financial models. We need to have these difficult conversations. We need to give ourselves and I think that's the only way we're going to achieve an energy transition that is foundationally just, by fixing some of the cracks in the foundation and then building this house and building the ship that we're all going to be sailing on. And that's essentially it for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kalnisha. And I think I'm always I always really like and enjoy unsexy discussions, because I think that that gives us an opportunity to actually dig deeper and do a deep dive into the issues that are actually at hand. And I think that part of what Futurecasting as a platform seeks to do is not only look at the nice and flowery parts of the future. It's to look at what is happening at the moment and some of the deeper questions, but together balancing it out as to how do we then answer those questions so that we can be able to shift away from just talking to actually doing and actioning. So with that said, I'd like to please invite you to please keep your camera on, Kalnisha, and then invite Alex and Dudu to switch on their cameras, please. And then let us start. I think that it has been quite eye-opening for myself to have a perspective from the government space, what the private sector is doing, as well as what is happening within the development space. I think that the insights as to how to even think about just energy transition, how to even think about the question of localizing it and thinking about the just component is an important one. So I will just start with you, perhaps, Kalnisha, in just saying that with all of them, I think the very important questions that you have laid on and the different measures that we can be able to employ in this process, knowing what maybe government is doing and the private sector is doing, and I know that you consult probably a lot with these environments, how do we then balance the talking and the action in us moving towards this direction? Because it's one thing to have important conversations, but it's another thing to do, because people sometimes just want they've got a so what. So we've spoken about it, and then what are we doing as a way forward? So yeah, maybe just to start off the conversation with that question.
So I think it's important. I mean, I think that the talking and the thinking and the planning is very, very important. It's important in every context, right? What our reality, though, is in South Africa particularly is that the thinking is following the actions of others. So the renewable energy industry already in this country is a decade old. We started doing the provisional feasibility assessments for renewable energy in 2005 and 2006. It was a long time ago. And it's only now that we're sort of publishing plans. The work's kind of already done, and it's kind of a systemic issue in South Africa where people start businesses and only when the bank asks for it do they design their business plan, right? It's kind of what we do in this country. It's not fundamentally sustainable. But I also think that, and I think I've said it before, that it's really important for us to reflect. It's important for us to reflect as a society on what's worked and what hasn't. And I think it actually starts in a household. And as a mother, I can say this quite confidently, that the advice that we're giving our kids is very, very fundamentally important right now. And I hear lots of families and households still singing the same song that, go to school, study, go to university, get a job. The reality is that the economy is shifting fundamentally, and by the time that these kids that are now in school go look for jobs, the world of work is going to be completely different. So we need to be advising them different. Similarly, I think when we're speaking about empowerment, the BE strategies of 10 years ago don't work, or they haven't worked, and we've learned that they haven't worked. We need to engage our empowerment conversations, not such that our BE partners or the BE partner, like, the wife in an arranged marriage, they're for sure, but has nothing really to say. The local partners, the BE partners, the Black female businesses in the renewable energy industry now have a lot to offer. And I think that it is important for us to engage the local players in our conversations. What we tend to do is that we tend to put international players on a pedestal, right? It's like I said, it's sexy to have conversations with the World Bank, and it's sexy to have conversations with international consultants. The reality is we need to start having those same conversations and the strategic conversations with local players, because we have a lot of value to add, and nobody knows our systems better than we do. And I think that is the burning frustration that a lot of SMEs are feeling, a lot of local players are feeling, a lot of local communities are feeling, particularly around renewable energy projects and mining projects, actually. I feel like we need to rethink how we do feasibility assessments, environmental impact assessments. Consultants, I mean, and I'm one of them, get paid lots of money to roll into communities and spend a week and then make assumptions based on what we see without ever actually engaging the local community members. And that's a model that doesn't work. It doesn't breed any confidence. And it actually just, it needs to change. And I think that's kind of the bottom line. That's how we shift things, by reframing how we do the work that we do.
Thank you so much for that. I think the important part there is the reshifting and the reframing. And I think, Alex, I see that you were having some discussions with those online, but I think I would want to refer to Karen Shippey's comment. I think connecting it to the question of, as the NBI, what kind of roles do corporations have with regards to advancing the JET, especially with the work that you've done, considering as well the gendered question of the women empowerment within the section. So I see Karen's one is just looking at justice within women's economic empowerment. And I know that you've got successful projects that you guys have ran. And I just wanted to know how is that being balanced, that gap?
Sure, thank you. I mean, I think firstly, the way we try to approach it with corporates is to think about their value chain. And essentially, a value chain, or even like a supply chain, is a market lever, if you can put it that way. If there is a way to bring township-based businesses into a corporate value chain, you can make significant strides. And that's kind of the approach that we're developing. We obviously are a member-based organization. We work with a lot of large companies, large listed entities, for example, but they have extensive supply chains and value chains. And if there is a way to diversify those and bring in new entrants, then there's a really significant opportunity. So what we're trying to do, and what we are achieving to a reasonable extent, is building that young entrepreneur or business to the point where they're actually able to bid and to be form part of that kind of, I guess, more mainstream economy. And so that's the kind of training that we're providing them. We're doing it in a specific area because those are areas where we think that they could play a significant role. And that's kind of our, I guess, in some ways, our theory of change. And it does have a gendered lens. So when we train young people, we obviously do gender equity and social inclusion training. We do JC training, but we specifically track our female enrollments, our female graduates, and have helped a number of female-owned businesses to then enter into corporate value chains. So for us, that's probably the most sustainable model. On the one side, we have the large businesses which have got the large spend and the large opportunity. We're just supporting the smaller businesses and the ways in which they can access those markets where they are valued entities in the supply chain. I mean, I can give examples, but I mean, for example, in quite a few businesses in the construction sector, in the hospitality sector, where we've had specifically women that have developed their own businesses and have become part of that success model. But of course, I mean, that's only one example, one set of examples.
Thank you so much, Alex. And I just want to put it's Karen Goldberg on the spot. Do you mind just maybe hopping in, unmuting yourself and asking the participants those questions? Because I do think that we do have an opportunity to ask them how are they imagining the future casting questions. So can you just maybe ask very targeted questions to the panelists?
Yeah, I guess coming into this webinar, I was imagining that we'd be hearing a lot more about kind of a futures orientation, futures thinking, futures methodologies that, have been applied in the JET space. And I'm just, I was curious about that. So I don't know whether that's specifically for the panelists or just more broadly, I'm very curious to hear about, you know, what Futures tools and methods have already been applied, either at a localized level or at a national level. And it's not targeted at anyone in particular. I mean, I imagine that could be responded to by anyone on this call.
I'm not sure, do any of the panelists want to take a go at it? Maybe by just reframing it a bit, I think it's not, because with the Futurecasting, a lot of the conversations are not just specifically for people that are futures thinkers. It's mainly for people that are participating and working in various spaces. So it's mainly, I think, about looking into how are we imagining the futures based on the particular topics that we're engaged in. So maybe the methodologies and the futures thinking might be a bit of a stretch, because what we have with the panelists is not necessarily people that might necessarily have the methodologies on lock, but the work that they're doing in their everyday work does touch on constructing a particular future. So maybe just broadly on the webinar, and I can just give it maybe Alex, Dudu, or Kalnisha to try to address that question from Karen.
So I'll try. We do a lot of futures mapping in the work that we do around local economic development, in particular communities. And what we've done specifically is we've sort of taken the opportunity around the ED obligations that IPPs have and REAP to sort of design some communities of the future as we see them. And what that means for us particularly is sort of unlocking these economic enablers within those communities. So firstly, designing for access to electricity within usually a 50-kilometer radius. That involves the installation of microgrids, usually and sort of innovative renewable energy solutions. The second challenge we tackle is typically access to the internet, which historically we've done through distributed, I forget the word now, sort of just like your distributed web technology across communities to ensure ubiquitous access at low cost. And then solving for the innovative education solutions, which is quite interesting to do in a rural setting, because everybody perceives school to be a red building or a red brick building with a red roof, right? And lots of impressive teachers. But what we've managed to do is implement virtual schooling, virtual high school, particularly in some more remote communities, and then enable access for high potential high schoolers to access international university courses through a specific MIT program called MIT Media Labs. And what we're trying to do in those processes is enable local South African children to be global citizens, and sort of break down the sort of traditional barriers towards economic participation and access for those communities. I can't say that we've used a particular futurecasting methodology, because what we've just tried to do is just imagine the society that everybody in that community deserves. And we believe that as much as we have this beautiful developmental frameworks in our systems, what they do presuppose is that the wealthy stay wealthy and the poor stay poor. And we want to sort of shift that narrative. There's money in the pool to firmly embed everyone in South Africa in the middle class. And we want to sort of realize that as a future for the communities that we work in.
Thank you. And I just wanted to pull in Dudu quickly and maybe just quickly ask, so what are some of the most significant barriers perhaps that you experience with implementing JET, especially maybe at a provincial level, and how is the department addressing these challenges, especially in a sustainable way that wouldn't necessarily have to be rethought continuously?
I think mostly, before I say that, I think Karen has asked a very, very good question of futuristic methodology and all these other tools. It's just that sometimes it's very much difficult because you already have people that are unemployed with the decommissioning of the power station closure of mines. So you're dealing with two issues. You're dealing with the current situation that you have to find some economical sustainability for the people. At the same time, to be futuristic, what is it that you want to see maybe in a certain years? So somewhere, somehow, I think in Mpumalanga, what we have done maybe on that, we have come with a Mpumalanga Green Economy Cluster. And then that cluster, it's working very well. It's mobilizing funding. That is the current project that are coming at a local level. We have to see a mechanism on how to sort of like implement it as we go along. Community, we're saying that they are not eating plants. There are a lot of plans that we have developed, and then, but those kind of plans are very hard to be implemented if we are all over the place and then dealing with different kinds of issues, dealing with service delivery, dealing with unemployment and all these other issues. But at the same time, we are looking at more on women empowerment, economy empowerment and inclusivity. So these are the kind of issues that we have just like now push it forth to say, let us start dealing with that. I think as we go along now, trying to reduce the unemployment or employment vulnerability and unemployment, scarcity all this time. As we are continuing, this is when we are starting to unpack it a little bit and developing that. As you remember that the just transition issues, people were still grappling with the climate change. What is this climate change? All of a sudden, this is just transition. As they are just like grappling and playing with terminologies that are not of terminologies that are thrown in. So it is what maybe community was saying that, whoa, just wait a little bit with all this terminology. Just come onto our level to tell us what is it that we can do. Because out of this, we don't want to be left behind. We want to come up with some other projects that are going to be sustainable. We understand what we are saying on the climate change, but make sure that you allow us to be innovative on our own end, to look on the indigenous knowledge side, to say how we used to live, and then whether can we pull up all those and mix it with the new technologies that are happening on the ground. It's just that most of the time we don't listen to the people on the ground. And then we undermine their intellect and their capabilities of coming up with the sustainable sort of like projects that can last them for long. So this is what maybe I just want to highlight first. But what we have noted on your question that you've asked is the governance part. As long as we are all doing different sort of activities differently, and then it will be very difficult to come together. I think Kanisha has placed it very well, that we are dealing with the easy issues here. And then after that, you decommission the power station, all of a sudden you come up with a food garden project. You understand? You come with a small project that are not going to be impactful at the end of the day. So, but if you come with the industrialization, what Alex is highlighting, all these issues. So we really need to come together, all of us, and have sort of like one plan to say, how can we tackle maybe a certain area that is negatively impacted, and to see the results of it. All of us, we come with our guns and then targeting this elephant. And we really want to say, let us shoot it until it kills. But if you're going to come with different projects there and there, it's not going to be impactful.
Thank you so much for that and for actually giving us a much more succinct response. And I'd just like to ask Alex, any closing remarks or anything that you would like to say to everybody in attendance before we close?
Thank you. I'll be quick. Just to say, we haven't really done any kind of future casting, but I mean, we're focusing on what we think are obviously significant growth sectors for the economy. So we know that, I mean, in terms of renewable energy, we need to massively scale up our installed capacity. That brings a whole bunch of economic opportunity. There's a global mega trend around electric vehicles, and green hydrogen and all its associated products is, potentially a very, very significant economic boost for our country. So in that sense, we're just focusing in on those kinds of growth sectors, but also their associated value chains. And those for us are the kind of mega trends and future sectors that we need to follow. We think the implementation model doesn't have to, I mean, we have now, doesn't necessarily have to change. We just have to leverage it within those particular sectors. The one area where I think we are innovating and thinking about the future is things like the Climate Finance Accelerator, where new business models and new financing models, new opportunities are coming through the system, but they obviously need support to become viable businesses. So it's not so, that's the kind of more practical, but that's the kind of thinking behind our work.
Thank you so much. And Kalnisha, just quick 30 seconds of your final thoughts.
I think I always sound a bit like a naysayer, but I feel like there's so much interesting and exciting opportunities around the just energy transition narrative, around the renewable energy industry, particularly for young people, young innovative people, especially women, actually, across the country. And I think that it really warrants us having like a lot of really like in-depth conversations around what those opportunities are, because I feel like a lot of people don't understand what they look like. And I wanna give a very practical example. There's currently only 3 or 4 environmental scientists that are able to provide the environmental impact assessments required for utility scale renewable energy. So I think if there are young people in the audience and you're looking for what to study, maybe go study environmental science, because there's a huge need in this country. It's the same for things like water use, indigenous plants. A lot of the knowledge that we require in the feasibility stages of these projects are locked in the minds of our gogos in the communities, right? There's a lot of work that needs to be done in documenting the history, and the history particularly of the land. It's a huge anthropological opportunity for young people to sort of embark on those projects. So when Alex speaks about unlocking the value chain, there's this whole world of a value chain that we haven't, that isn't in our sort of, in our the foreground of our perception, that we need to unlock. So I think we are at a very, very exciting time in the trajectory of our continent, and it's wonderful to be right here, right now, actually.
Thank you so much. Yay, finally, a non-naysaying or difficult perspective. Do quick roundup before we close. Okay, I think we might have, oh, I see the mic is on. Dudu?
I think on this issue, we have to understand that on the just energy transition, we are dealing with a human element that really needs to be taken care of and to be looked at, not to be undermined, because we really want to achieve a certain goals, especially as South Africa. But at the same time, yes, we know that the greenhouse gas emissions is the sort of like in terms of the international agreement. But at the same time, to see the livelihood that is going to be impacted by that. If it's not packed very well, it's going to have a major more impact than what we are anticipating to have. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I would really like to thank every person who is on this call, who has joined the webinar, and for staying with us for so long and for actually being so engaged. Thank you for your participation. And I would like to extend a specific thank you to Dudu, Alex, as well as Kalnisha for coming and sharing the work that they are doing and providing insights and potential opportunities of where we could look, where we can be on the lookout for, and where we can actually collaborate. Again, again, understanding that localizing can be thought about at different levels, that just doesn't, there isn't just one definition that covers everything. It's something that we still need to kind of thresh out within the community of people that are interested in solving the future problems of this particular topic. And with that said, I just want to mention that 2 weeks from now on, we will be able to actually even sooner share this particular recording together with the resources with the permission of our presenters, if they'll be able to share the slides. And then these are things that you can always be able to share with your network, as well as just watch again as a refresher. Thank you so much for joining our Futurecasting webinar, for being such an engaged audience. Thank you to our panelists for coming in and sharing all of the amazing work that you are doing. And until next time, I am going to end today's meeting and say bye-bye, everyone.